What's a deep, dark rabbit hole to research when bored? This should give you an hour or two. List of unusual deaths. Charondas was a Greek lawgiver from Sicily, Italy. According to Diodorus Siculus, he issued a law that anyone who brought weapons into the assembly must be put to death. One day, he arrived at the assembly seeking help to defeat some brigands in the countryside, but with a knife still attached to his belt. In order to uphold his own law, he committed suicide. What an absolute Chad. Whoops, guess I'll die. Fool me once, commit suicide, never fooled again. Shipwrecks. Been absolutely obsessed with them the past few days. There's so much to discover and learn about, and so much corruption as well as just interesting circumstances that these huge machines go down in. And adding to that, technical diving accidents, especially in shipwrecks. You can dive down to the sunken Andrea Doria, that wrecked because another enormous ship collided sideways into it. Ship and collect first-class dinnerware as plunder. But people have died, seemingly becoming lost in the complete darkness of the halls inside. Or user error in any capacity, such as not having the correct oxygen tank levels, leading to hallucinations and false confidence that makes you drown. Edit. I can't thank you guys enough for all the media recommendations and personal anecdotes from these shipwrecks. I have a lot to binge for the next few weeks, and I am fascinated by the stories shared in these comments. I'm reading every one. The sea is completely indifferent, and if you F around you find out. Can confirm about sea survival stories. A good place to start would be the Discovery Channel show I Shouldn't Be Alive. That led me to research one of the episodes about 2 survivors, Brad Kavanaugh and Deborah Scaling-Kiley. It started out with maybe 5 survivors, and one of them had septicemia from an open wound on her leg, and the water at the bottom of the lifeboat was filthy. They had to dump her body overboard and listen as the sharks tore her body apart. Even though it was all done by actors years later, it was horrifying to watch. A video sometimes shows up here of a scuba diver recovering bodies from a wreck at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and suddenly he sees a hand reach into the water. Harrison Ojigbo Kene survived for 3 days in the trapped air and was recovered somewhere around May 29, 2013. And then there's the story of the sinking of the Oceanos on August 4, 1991. Captain Yanis Avranis abandoned ship, leaving all the passengers to fend for themselves. An employee, specifically a guitarist, ended up heading the rescue effort on the ship along with his girlfriend. They saved hundreds. There's a great little group exercise you can take to see if your mindset matches that of the US Coast Guard when it comes to survival items. Ranked by importance. Just Google Listat C Instructions 8192015 and you'll see what I mean. Harrison Ojigbo Kene survived for 3 days in the trapped air and was recovered somewhere around May 29, 2013. Just discovered this guy the other day. Can't imagine how an experience like that would change you. And the sounds he heard of swimming, presumably a shark, consuming his colleagues. Just no. Initial reports after his rescue stated he would never go back near the water. However, there's a good bookend to that chapter of his life. He became a certified commercial diver in 2015. The rescue diver who discovered him at the bottom of the ocean presented him with his diploma. 2021. The saved section of your Reddit user profile. I've saved so much SH and then promptly forgot about it, just like I'm going to do with this thread. I've been on Reddit so long it's like an archaeological dig going through my saved list. Sounds a bit like my watch later list on YouTube. There's too much in there to even tidy it up. It'd take a full week. Honestly, mine is just pee. Deep dive into my saved posts is a bunch of pee that unfortunately no longer exists since Gficat stopped hosting it. Money laundering and how laundered money flows around the world. Most info is public from gov agencies like the CIA and State Department. Yeah, not a cop but work in fintech and have done fraud and AML, anti-money laundering, detection, computer stuff. It's pretty depressing. It def was eye-opening when I was younger, realizing 1. How money laundering looks a lot like most tax evasion schemes. From a computer detection standpoint, they're almost the same thing when all you can view is say financial transactions and records. Raggarding 1. Isn't the point of money laundering to pay taxes on your dirty money, thus making it legit? Sometimes. The point is really just to get your money through an institution that you can plausibly say generated that money. Many times that includes paying taxes. That being said, many tax evasion schemes are to get your money through institutions in some kind of finagled way to lower your overall tax burden. There's a lot of overlap. Very few cartels will put their money through institutions in schemes where they'd have to pay short-term capital gains, for example, although sometimes it happens. Better to put it through a business that can take losses or modest profits so the margin is better on the washing. When I worked at a call center, we often had quiet times and the internet blocked most things. Unusual Wiki articles kept me entertained for quite some time though. It's full of random strange things. OSH, thanks for this. Also, should I be embarrassed that I recognize a fair number of these? Maybe I should go outside sometimes. Nah, not at all. I am full of random useless facts due to things like this. I'd be great at a pub quiz but not much else. Yeah, whenever I had to sub as a receptionist while she was having lunch, I'd read Crime Library, org. The Wiki for the timeline for far future events. If you want to feel insignificant and learn some SH, check this out. Dude, I read the whole effing thing and I got to work all day tomorrow. Thanks for the link, but F you. Yeah, I just got through it. Humanity will be extinct either 10,000 years from now or 7,8 million years from now. Apparently both numbers have a 95% probability. Feral children. I had to stop reading these accounts because it made me too sad seeing over and over that the rescuers almost always killed the kids' animal families and the children pretty much never had any quality of life after. I wonder how long that could go, without outside intervention. Like, could they become adults and still remain with those animals? Research in this field is really weird. We have very few unbiased sources and it's not well documented. They loved the theme in the 19th century because it was what they saw as nature versus culture, and a lot of shady experiments were done. Basically the big question was, were those kids regular kids that got adopted by animals and never learned humans' ways and became feral, or were they mentally ill delayed beforehand? There is a big chance that a lot of them were abandoned because they had some kind of cognitive deficiency and were found after weeks, not years, by themselves. That was probably the case of Victor of Aveyron. When questioned about hypothesis about Victor of Aveyron, Shattuck said, though born normal, developed a serious mental or psychological disturbance before his abandonment. Precocious schizophrenia, infantile psychosis, autism, a number of technical terms have been applied to his position. Several psychiatrists I have consulted favor this approach. It provides both a motivation for abandonment and an explanation for his partial recovery under Itar's treatment. He had no survival SKS and no defense mechanisms, so it seems likely that most of those children would die pretty quickly and not reach adulthood. Marie-Angelique Leblanc, on the other hand, was different. She spent 10 years in the wilderness, but she had a normal cognition and had been socialized before she escaped to live in the wilderness. She regressed but had exceptional survival and wilderness SKS. She was also with another kid, an African slave who was later shot and killed, which probably helped with her cognitive SKS even though they didn't use any articulated language. She was able to learn how to read and write and live in society later on. She writes Histoire d'une jeune fille sauvage trouvée dans les bois à l'âge de Dixons. She is the only feral child who was able to be re-educated, and it's likely that she could have survived longer in the wild had she not been found. So I think it's very likely that most of them would have died shortly after had they not been found, and a lot probably did. Having a normal cognition and some socialization early on probably helped a lot though. I remember when I had read about Jeannie for my psycholinguistics course years ago. The history of lobotomies and cannibalism. I have spent more time researching these topics than the time taken to write a 90-page essay. Super fascinating if you don't get grossed out. Lobotomies disturb me in more ways than I can express. It's a profound violation of your identity and self. To have your very mind mutilated until you don't even recognize what you are. That total robbing of you as a person, leaving you mentally inert, is a thing out of horror. Lobotomies have always been of interest to me, primarily because of how ludicrous it sounds to my mind that anyone rationalized it as a legitimate use of medical services. If you haven't watched Netflix's Ratched series, there is a scene depicting a lobotomy being done. It's not visually graphic, but the sound they portray was effing haunting. Good God, if it actually sounded anything like that, it would sit uneasy with me for years. The worst thing about it, emo, is that they use lobotomies as a punishment against people who pissed off someone in power. The domino effect that led up to World War I and then later World War II. It's interesting to learn about, but it's just a cluster of easily preventable situations. My history professor would always say in college that some historians consider World War II really World War I and was just a continuation of World War I. World War II was just World War I storming out of the room after an argument and coming back while yelling and another thing. I've also heard the World Wars referred to as the Second 30 Years' War, which I find a really fascinating perspective. Both were periods of conflict on a global scale, with a relative lull for a time, before large-scale action resumed. Many don't realize that, for some countries, especially in Europe and the Middle East, World War I didn't end. It just evolved into numerous civil conflicts, such as the Armenian mass killing, the Finnish Civil War, the Russian Civil War. Heck, the Italians went to war with Yugoslavia before the ink had dried on the tray of Versailles. Poland and Ukraine went to war, then became best friends, and fought the Bolsheviks together, all in the same year. World War I in a sense ended because everybody decided, F this, y'all figure it out yourselves. I'm going home and finding someone else to fight. Instead of big team fights, it just became a bunch of battle royales or tag team matches. Interwar action was darn near as intense as World War I had been. Caving and cave diving accidents. Accidentally watched one in YouTube, then went down the rabbit hole. This led to some more parallel topics of horrible fates, bad deaths, etc. After few days, started getting disturbed sleep as this became my routine of watching before the sleep time. With self-restraint, finally I got out of it. Bushman's Hole, an underwater cave that goes down nearly 1,000 feet. The surface is at an altitude of almost 5,000 feet, making for an especially difficult dive. I recall reading that it takes a team of support divers and 12 full hours to reach the bottom and resurface. 3 people have died there. The third guy died while trying to recover the body of the second to die. He became entangled in the ropes he had affixed to the corpse and overexerted himself. The exertion combined with the depth caused him to pass out and he died. He did accomplish what he set out to do though. 3 days later his body floated to the surface. Still entangled with the remains he went down to recover. I remember reading up on this one a while ago. They had multiple divers stationed at depth intervals to help. Don Shirley was to be the second deepest after Dave, who was the one who died and had gone all the way to the bottom. As Don was descending he knew his friend was dead because he could see the flashlight Dave had was not moving. I always found that quite eerie. Don almost died as well. His oxygen regulator broke at a depth he was not supposed to be at. So he started to get CO2 poisoning, I think, causing him to resort to 2 functions: vomiting and breathing. Miraculously he got out but had a very long recovery ahead of him. People who go missing. This one I'm particularly fascinated with for some reason. Maybe it's because I like this YouTuber and how he formats his videos, but I've watched this video about a missing Canadian girl 3 times. Personally, I think she was groomed by a dude she met online and that guy kidnapped her and is holding her captive. Like the Joseph guy from Austria years back. God, I hope she's found. The twisted mind of a person that would harm someone who's simply trying to be a friend, looking for love, etc. It breaks my heart to hear of these stories. It breaks my very soul. That part of Canada is notorious for having young girls go missing. They've broken up rings there before. She was likely sold into slavery and sent abroad. It breaks my heart to think about, too. Rabies. You don't quite realize how horrifying it is. A few months ago I saw an old black and white footage on a Reddit sub of a man in a hospital literally dying from it. You actually saw him die in front of the camera, in a horrendous, painful twitching manner. And there was nothing the medical people could do about it, to either prevent it or make it any more comfortable for him. Yeah, if I ever get rabies, just effing K me. That's how you make it more comfortable. Skip the whole hydrophobic and suffering part. Go to doctor immediately if you've been bitten by an animal. It's your only shot. Don't wait. Prion diseases. Every single one is weird and dark. It includes cannibalism and family curses, and deers walking on 2 legs. And industrial farming plus forced cow cannibalism. Edit, thanks for 2,000 upvotes. I would also add treating people with dead people's brain extract, and also that fungi can get prions. But they just don't care that much. Fungi are weird. 2 fun facts I learned in med school about this. The most common human prion disease is Creutzfeldt-Jakob and 85% of cases occur spontaneously. There is a widespread mutation in the human population that protects against Kuru, a human prion disease spread by cannibalizing brains. This suggests cannibalism was a common practice at some point in human history. I know it can be a part of funeral practices historically, and of course starvation conditions are common enough. Eating human brain can be part of funeral practices? Binge-watching Mayday, the series about plane crashes, and looking up each incident on Google Wiki afterwards. Yep, second this. If anyone interested, I would check out our Admiral Cloudberg, very in-depth but digestible write-ups on a whole host of different incidents. I can't start reading our Admiral Cloudberg because when I look at the clock, hours have passed. Great content. Sleep paralysis, audio-visual hallucinations across cultures throughout history. It's disturbing. I experienced this as a teenager. I'd see a tall, thin, shadowy figure in the corner of the room. It almost seemed amorphous, but basically bipedal and had wings, webbing, on its back and underarms. It would sort of ooze down to the floor, stand upright at the foot of my bed for a bit, then sort of ooze into the air a few feet over my body and just sort of stare, no eyes, really, at me for a while until I could move again. It didn't really talk, but it sort of whispered gibberish at me in a very hostile manner. I'll be glad if I never experience that again. How do humans consistently conjure up the same imagery? Crazy. I was thinking that too. If you're half awake half asleep, which is what supposedly causes the visual hallucinations, right? Then why is never some goofy goober peanut man dancing around? The times where we have gotten close to extinction. There was a false report from a Russian radar thingy and they thought that nukes were coming to them from America. If it wasn't for one person, nuclear Armageddon would have happened because of a software glitch. Another good one is how some horrible stuff like cannibalism is legal in certain scenarios. If it wasn't for one person, nuclear Armageddon. Soviet naval officer Vasily Arkhipov, the brigade chief of staff on submarine B-59. The radar false positive sounds more like Stanislav Petrov, though of course the real upshot there is that this has happened multiple times. We have become death, the destroyer of our world. Things about the universe. It's overwhelming. You get kind of a tremendous existential angst, but somehow you can't stop. It makes me very depressed sometimes and I have to stop for a week or two. Ignorance is bliss. The mysteries and the unknowns of reality. The fact that I will never know so much. Probably humanity will never know so much. Does not seem depressing to me. I find it quite beautiful. A life of possibilities with no clear path besides the ones we choose. It's quite beautiful to me. Religious cults. There's so many documentaries out there, literally weeks of entertainment. I spent like a solid month a year or two ago watching documentaries, YouTube videos about the Mormon Church. There's a crap ton of videos and articles about the various Christian fundy groups, cults, and once you get deep into the rabbit hole it's honestly scary. Like straight up sinister. This is mine. Not just the cults themselves but the psychology behind why people get sucked into them. Have a hard time escaping and adapting back to reality when they leave. Fascinating and terrifying. My husband was born and raised Mormon in Utah County, the Mormoniest of Mormon places, and it's quite scary and fascinating to read up on it or watch documentaries. First, it's like Lana in Archer, so much just starts to make sense all of a sudden, but also I get a little glimpse into how close I was to getting sucked into it all. He had sorta kinda left when we got married, but he dipped back in and I was being very heavily persuaded to join. As well, I'm an educated, intelligent woman with a strong outside support system and a decent sense of self. If they could get me to flirt with the idea. How easy is it for cults to suck in someone who is isolated, naive, lonely, insecure, dependent on others? Ask a Mortician on YouTube. Caitlin Doughty tells fascinating stories of unusual deaths, cannibalism, historic shipwrecks, accidents. Her cannibal trilogy can't be missed. This is a phrase I want to hear someone say loudly during a sudden lull in conversation at a party. Fire disasters, and then never feel safe in an indoor crowded space ever again. There's actually video on YouTube of the Great White Disaster and it's utterly horrifying how incredibly quickly it happens, and seeing the people literally stuck in the doorway unable to get out as they burn to death. As someone who still goes to a lot of shows at small packed music venues exactly like that one, and other totally packed bars and clubs, I'm always constantly looking for exits to find the nearest escape path, and it always freaks me out anytime there's any fire in any indoor space, candles sparkle or pyrotechnic seek. It's a brutal video, but so important to learn from. Know your location. Know your exits, plural. Pay attention. The answer to what's going on over there is GTFO. That video has saved me twice. I left a small dive bar before a drunken fight erupted. The bystander who took my spot also took a pint glass to the face. I fled a gas station without paying. Something just wasn't right inside the store. It was being held up at gunpoint. Yes, I went straight to the police. I live close to where the station fire happened. I was a kid at the time, but the impact it left on the state of RIA is still felt to this day. We immediately were taught about the importance of locating your exits and knowing when a crowd was too big for the space. A less known fact is there is a survivor of that fire who literally survived by being insulated from the bodies around Hiva. They were found at the main entrance where most of the fatalities occurred, under a pile of burnt bodies. They were also severely burned if I remember correctly, but did survive. Also, the person who filmed that was there to do a report on fire hazards within crowded bars. Terrible irony, but is the main reason the camera person survived. They saw it coming before practically anyone else. Had they started to leave a few moments later, that footage may have been lost along with the camera person. The history of bananas. Look up Chiquita. From paying tis to child labor. They have a huge list of interesting corruption cases they've been caught for. Formerly known as United Fruit. Between the 20s and the 50s, were directly involved in some really over-the-top stuff. Up to and including bribing government officials to support revolutions and civil wars and dictatorships in Central and South America. Their history is fascinating, but a little scary. Mass hysteria. There are different kinds that have affected different cultures in different ways. Multiple times throughout history, groups of people have uncontrollably danced themselves to deaths. In other parts of the world, men can become stricken with the belief that their male reproductive organ is receding into their bodies. It was often believed the only way to prevent this from happening overnight was for family members to hold their members, etc. You can't forget about the crutch of nuns that just started meowing and only stopped because the nearby town threatened to K them all if they didn't stop. Sister Gertrude, would you kindly cut the SH? No, we're cat girls. We run around the convent purring. And the priests scratch our chins.